Hey guys, this is Kim from Read It Again Bookstore, and today I'm joined by Mark Warren. Hey Mark.
Hello.
Okay, can you tell us a little bit about yourself? So guys, this guy's really interesting. Go for it.
Okay, now I've got to be really interesting. Well, as a boy, I grew up completely in love with the forest, and that's where I wanted to spend all my time. But I also loved art and writing, and on the rainy days, I would set up a card table in our house and bring out, I remember I had these packages of yellow unlined paper. I would fold them and make little booklets out of them and write a story and illustrate it, and then I would bind it with yarn through the fold. And I had a bunch of those books. I wish I could just hold one up and show it to you, but I lost everything in a fire at one point. So I've had this love for writing for a very long time, but I did not get really serious about it until about 10 years ago. And now this has become my main passion, I believe, now. I went to a military school in high school where I didn't belong. And then I went to the University of Georgia and just kind of weaved my way around, not following a major in a dedicated way because I didn't really know what I was going to do. And I started out in art. And through art, I got very interested in the human body from the models. And then I started into medicine and majored in pre-med and had every intention of going to medical school. And the summer before I was supposed to go, I realized I could not spend my days inside as a doctor. So that was a big turning point for me. Not one that pleases your parents necessarily, but I remember my father thought that I was probably taking an easy way out, but it was one of the hardest things I ever did. And then formed my own wilderness school from really nothing. And now I have a 35-acre piece of property in the mountains that's
so cool.
Mine to look after for a while, and that's where I have students come in and learn about Cherokee survival skills and medicines and foods, things of that sort.
So you were telling me earlier today you taught a class on trees?
Today was a private class. Had 11 women who apparently do a lot of little excursions from time to time together, which I thought was really neat. And this one was, by their request, all about trees and how to identify them in the winter and how to use them. And it was just a great day. And several women there today suffered from migraines, and I was able to share with them this wonderful medicine that I have now seen cure a migraine in less than an hour.
What?
I've seen it happen 10 times.
I need it. What is it?
Well, it's the inner bark of the flowering dogwood, the dogwood that everyone knows. The flip side of that, unfortunately, is that all of our dogwoods are dying now from an anthrax infestation. It's connected to a fungus that floats around and killing our dogwoods. So now we have the dilemma of, should you cut into a dogwood tree to get that inner bark and leave that scar, which makes it vulnerable to the anthrax.
Wow. But it really worked. That's interesting.
Yeah, I've never had a migraine, so I can't tell you that I've experienced that, but I've been part of that experience 10 different times now. 9 times with adult females, 1 time with a teenage boy.
Oh, I get them. I get them a lot, actually. Yeah. I'm gonna have to look into that. Do they know what the chemical compound is in it it's helping?
It's cornic acid. The dogwood's Latin name is cornus, the Latin for horn, as in an animal's horn, because it's a very hard substance, and dogwood is one of our hardest trees. So the acid that is made by that tree. One of the acids is called cornic acid. And on paper, to a chemist, that was my major, by the way, chemistry. But to a chemist, on paper, cornic acid has similarities to salicylic acid, which I'm sure you know is the precursor of aspirin.
Uh,
But the differences somehow make it applicable to a migraine.
that's fascinating. Okay. Well, let's switch to books. Okay, how many books have you written?
Published
Published.
7, and 4 more coming out this year.
Wow. Okay. And today we're here to talk about Wyatt Earp.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So tell us about that. Tell us about your books.
Okay. Well, let me tell you about the inception of it. I was 7 years old, and even at that early age, I was fascinated with the idea of courage. And in that time, I grew up, I'm 73 now, so I grew up in the 50s. And at that time, literature about American, quote, heroes was very sanitized. And the authors wanted to give people someone to be a role model. And so I got hold of a book on Wyatt Earp and read it and was completely taken with the story because of that theme of courage. It seemed like courage over the top to me, and I wanted to understand it more. So I began a serious research of Wyatt Earp at a very young age, wanting to know the truth of it. And it has been an interesting journey because there is still huge debate up to this day. And there's still new information coming in every year. But this is what started it for me, this fascination with courage. And the interesting thing is that I learned that courage was not necessarily the quality that pulled Wyatt Earp forward. He was a very direct man who tackled problems head on, but it was more of fearlessness than courage. And there's a great difference in the two, even though the results of each one can look very similar. With courage, you're having to overcome a fear and then act. And with fearlessness, you simply have this abundance of confidence, self-confidence. And fear doesn't enter into the equation. You just know you can handle the problem and you step forward into it. And the funny part of it is, I've been told that so many times in my research by people from Wyatt's time. For example, Bat Masterson, who has a reputation in his own right, he wrote this quote about Wyatt in this book that he put out on famous gunmen of the West. And he said that Wyatt Earp is one of the few men in the West who was completely devoid of physical fear. And when I read that as a youngster, I interpreted that as, here's a brave man. But that's not what he said. And then I would read it again, written by another famous lawman, Bill Tillman. He said that virtually the same thing. And still, I misread it. And only until, in the last, I would say, quarter century did I understand the differences in those two things and begin to understand Wyatt better so that I could write this story. The hardest thing of all was getting into Wyatt's head to be able to write these stories. And that's the one thing I feel like that I've done.
So what are these books that we're talking about? Promised Land is your latest one. Your first one is Adobe.
The first part of the trilogy is Adobe Moon.
Okay.
And it starts with Wyatt as a teenager and explaining how he arrives at the personality that he is going to become famous for. Should I hold this up?
Yeah, go for it.
And
we have copies at the store, by the way. And I put a link in the comments if anybody's interested in buying some. Mark is local, so we could get them signed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The meaning behind Adobe Moon is it's a symbol to the people of Mexico about what they must settle for in their lives. For example, there's a moment when the moon rises, and because of the low angle in the atmosphere, you know how the moon can look just
Huge.
almost golden, very
Yeah.
big and golden or rusty. And so I chose that image, the Adobe Moon, as that symbol. And it really symbolizes Wyatt's life because he had great ambitions and he was never able to achieve them. He was a person who, in his foot soldier work as a lawman, he was he was almost unequaled in his ability to handle men.
Hmm.
Part of that was his physique. He was 6 feet tall in a time where the average man was 5, 6, or 7.
Hmm.
He weighed 160 pounds when the average man weighed 145. All that's related to nutrition of the time. It doesn't seem like much to us now, but so he did, in a sense, tower over most other men, and he was very strong. So he was able to handle himself, and he knew how to box because he'd been taught by a semi-professional boxer. So we get into his law work in the second
Hmm.
installment, which is Born to the Badge, and that covers his Kansas years as a lawman in a very tough arena working against Texas drovers as they bring cattle in for sale. And these Texans all had something to prove, and Wyatt was the man they had to face. So this was Wichita and Dodge City. And then the last book, which is probably the one that has the events that people are most familiar with, Promised Land, is about Wyatt's last bid at making a success of himself. He wanted to become uh, a businessman who headed up a transportation business with Stagecoach and also carrying silver bullion out of Arizona.
Hmm.
And when he got there to do that, uh, basically that type of business had glutted, and there was already a price war running there, so he couldn't sidle into that. It was pretty much a territory taken up, and so he had to go back to what he knew, and that was being a lawman.
What do you think he would, if he was alive today, what do you think he would think of the attention that his life has brought?
Some of your voice dropped out. Could you say that again?
I'm sorry. I said,
Yes, when you went backward, your voice
oh,
dropped out.
I'll stay here then.
Okay.
It's funny because when I do these, I just instinctively get closer and closer to the camera. I feel like I can see you better if I'm like on top of my computer. Um, I was wondering, what do you think Wyatt Earp would think of it, like his fame if he was alive today?
His fame. Well, he wouldn't want to talk about it. That's one thing. Uh, Everyone who tried to interview him said it was like pulling teeth. They couldn't. And even when he decided that he needed to get his book written, the reason for that was he wanted to correct all the lies that had been written about him and his brothers,
Hmm.
and he wanted a book so that a movie would be made of him. This was back in the very early days of movie making, and one of his great admirers was William S. Hart. And he knew that if the book could get out, they would make a movie of it, and that would set up his wife for a so-called retirement fee because he was poor. He was broke at the end.
So, what is your favorite Wyatt Earp movie?
Movie?
Yeah.
Hmm. Oh gosh, I suppose. Let me just put it this way. I really liked what Lawrence Kasdan and Kevin Costner tried to do.
Hmm.
The reason that movie did not do well is because Costner really hit the portrayal on the head. And Wyatt Earp is not a very likable man. He was not sociable.
Hmm.
He was not creative. He was not political. He just said it like it is, and he made a lot of enemies that way.
Huh.
Of course, the movie Tombstone with, I'm going to say Val Kilmer because he was the guy that stole the show.
Hmm.
That was very popular and a very entertaining one, but much less like the people involved. His Doc Holliday was the most entertaining Doc Holliday on film, but it was not Doc Holliday. And
Hmm.
Kurt Russell, as much as I think he's a good person, I think he did what he had to do to make his character likable, but it
Hmm.
wasn't Wyatt. So if I'm going to say my favorite, I'm going to name James Garner, believe it or not.
Love James
James
Gardner.
Garner played Wyatt Earp in a movie called Hour of the Gun,
Hmm.
and I thought he did a great job on that. And the movie was very entertaining.
Well, I love him because I don't know, he was so charming. He just had to stand there and his eyes would twinkle, you
Yeah,
know?
everybody loved that part of James Garner, which makes his Wyatt Earp portrayal that much more impressive. There were no twinkling eyes in that performance.
Mm. Okay, so what other books have you written besides Wyatt Earp books?
Well, I've written a series of 4 books on wilderness skills based around the Cherokees' use of plants and craft work. And um, those 4 books are written basically for 3 kinds of people. Number one, the person who wants to learn those hard skills, like how to create fire with your hands,
Mhm.
how to track an animal, uh, how to build a shelter to keep yourself warm in the dead of winter without a sleeping bag or a blanket, etc. Um, there's that. And then there's the person who perhaps is a scout leader or a state park ranger or any kind of leader of people in an outdoor situation to help them learn their environment better and make their teaching more interesting. And the third person I wrote it for is for parents and grandparents to know how to take your children into nature and have a meaningful experience.
So what kind of classes do you teach?
They are classes that basically teach about how to use this land.
Mhm.
For example, I start with plants always. Plants are the foundation of every class that I teach. Let me give you an example of that. One time I was asked to track a couple of runaway boys,
Mhm.
and they were being very elusive, and it's very hard to track somebody being elusive.
Mhm.
There came a point in that episode where they decided to walk single file on a barkless log that went down a long hill to a floodplain. And when I got to my end of that log, I could see no signs whatsoever of where they'd gone.
Mhm.
And so I thought I'd lost their trail. And I stood there looking around, trying to pick up another sign, and a smell came to me from down below. And that was the breeze coming off the creek across the floodplain. It brought to me the scent of a fern that I'm very familiar with called hay scented fern. It smells like wet hay. And
Mhm.
I knew that that had to be crushed in order to release that smell. So
Wow.
I walked down that log, and there were their big footprints where they jumped off the log right onto the ferns. And so that picked up the trail for me again. So there's a study of plants helping you as a tracker. I also teach how to stalk wild animals, how to come up close to wild animals and to observe them. Of course, this was a hunter's skill at one time, but I see it as an observer's skill or maybe a photographer's skill,
Photography?
if not a hunter's skill.
Yeah.
And how to build pyres for your making of a fire, how to build a shelter, how to purify water without pots and pans.
Oh, that's cool.
But you know, it's the plant world that gives you so much. There are certain trees you can tap for water, for example, and drink it right from the tree, or a vine. And
Have
there are plants that provide food, and the medicines that are out there would surprise you. It's all been out there from the beginning of time, and it's still there, but it's foreign territory to most people now.
have you and your did you have you written a book just about plants? Because you seem
Yeah,
very passionate. Which one was that?
Volume 1, Secrets of the Forest.
And I did put a link down below if you guys are interested in buying any of Mark's books. Okay, so volume one does plants. What's volume two?
Volume 1 does each book is divided into 2 portions. And
Okay.
portion A of book 1 is all about plants, how to
Mhm.
identify and how to use them. And the second part of that is more about survival skills such as shelter building,
Okay.
water purification, use of the throwing stick, things of that sort. The second book covers everything about fire, how to create it, how to sustain it, which woods work well for you, which don't, several different methods of creating fire with your hands. And the next part of that book is all about ceremony, which I feel is a big part of educating children in nature, getting them involved in a very deep way so that they feel a personal relationship within that picture book of nature where we walk, because most kids are spectators in the forest, and most adults are too. They're not really participants, and I like to help people become part of it. The third book is all about animals, tracking, stalking, using their hides to make buckskin and to make crafts with those.
Mhm.
And the second part of that book is another thing I very strongly believe in, and it's all about games in the forest. If children have fun in the forest, they'll want to come back. If they come back, they eventually develop a relationship, and then they have a reason to protect it.
Mhm. Um,
Otherwise, that's never going to happen.
so, and then you also wrote a nonfiction. It was a biography, you said?
It's a memoir, yeah,
Yeah.
of 2 years that I lived in a teepee.
Oh, you lived in. Okay, tell me about that.
Well, it started off where a lightning bolt found my rented house in the mountains where I was leasing land and running my school. And I had taken a group of summer campers back to Roswell, Georgia,
Mhm.
and decided to stay over the night because I was tired. So I stayed at the summer camp there. In other words, my place in the mountains was their outpost camp, and I brought campers up there to spend the week in a
Mhm.
more raw setting. So when I took them back, I stayed over that night, and that was the night that my house burned down with everything I own in it.
I'm sorry.
And that included my first book that I'd written, handwritten, only copy,
Mm.
and it included all of my music, which I'd been writing ever since I was 14 years old. So that was a big loss, but eventually I came to see it as a big freeing up time. And I did not want to leave that land. I had no house there. So I started living in a tent for a while, and that's a terrible life. So I knew I was going to be in a teepee eventually. So that was the time. And I set up a teepee, and that is a wonderful life. As I say in that book, this is where the word cozy was invented. I'm positive.
What what did what did what did you like about it? Like, what do you miss about it now?
You can have a fire in a teepee, and
Mhm.
that's everything. Your fire is just the center of your universe when you live in a teepee, especially in the wintertime. And when you're in a teepee, I was in the forest in mine. And the teepee is a Plains Indian home, and it
Mhm.
really never had a place in history here. But I love living in the forest in a teepee. And what happens when you do that? It always reminds me of what Annie Dillard said in Tinker's Creek,
Mhm.
uh, that if you want to experience nature, you've got to get in its way. It's got to bump into you on a daily basis.
I like
And
that.
so I had so many experiences that I never would have had otherwise,
Mm.
especially with animals.
Mhm.
Some of them are hard to believe, but
Like
every
what?
time,
Tell me what.
well, it's usually the favorite thing in this book to most people. So I'm not sure I want to give it all away, but it has to do with a
It was
raccoon that I had gotten to know a little bit in the wild. I'm not trying to say that we were, I could step out my teepee and call him in or anything, but we were very aware of each other. And uh, one night, on a very cold and very windy night, he
Mhm.
scratched on my teepee door. I opened it up, and he came in, and he
Oh,
died there. He died there that night.
oh, we
So he
had
was
a
sick, and I don't know how to explain it, but
yeah.
he came to the teepee to die.
Oh, we had a raccoon on our porch last week. He set off our lights in the backyard, and my husband looked through the window, and he had his hands through the bars of the deck, and he had the bird feeder in his hand, and he was banging it, trying to get it through the bars. And then he dropped it, and then my husband like got up and he ran away, and then he called me out, and so we're both staring out the window for him, and he peeks his head out from behind the fence and then comes back, and then he takes the bird feeder and he starts eating it. And so we opened the window, the mirror and the window, and we shined the light on him, and he was like,
You're right.
we yelled at him, he's like, I don't care, I'm gonna eat this. So
That's funny.
yeah.
Since we're talking raccoon, I got to tell you these. Uh, I've taken young people to Cumberland Island many times on camping trips,
Mhm.
school classes basically, and I've seen everything that raccoons can do because when you hang your garbage, they will figure it out. I've seen them stand on top of each other, making a pyramid to reach the bag. And I've seen one, and I'm sure his name was Odysseus, but he
Uh-huh.
climbed up the tree, out the limb, and dropped in a free fall to the garbage bag and tore it to pieces, and everything fell on the ground. And all the raccoons came scrambling out of the palmetto, and it was a feast.
That's crazy. Yeah. Wow. So what are you working on now?
Well, right now, believe it or not, I'm writing a book about squirrels. And this is going to be my bid for a Watership Now, but about squirrels.
Oh, that's such a sad book.
Watership Down, in my opinion, is one of the greatest books ever written.
Oh, it's a great book. It's still sad. I think if there's an animal in anything, it's sad. Oh, here we got a question. Mark, you said there were 4 volumes of your nature books. What is the 4th volume? Oh, yeah, sorry, we got distracted.
The 4th volume deals with projectiles. That means spear, atlatl, the rock throwing sling, the blowgun, the bow and arrow. And there's a huge section in archery there because that's one of my passions. I love the bow and arrow.
Mhm.
And the last part of that book is all about canoeing, and it takes the reader from lake canoeing to whitewater, starting on flat water so that you can not be swept away by the current and learn all the moves you need, and then everything about how to get into whitewater.
You said your projectiles. What was the second one you said? Do you remember?
Atlatl,
What's that?
it's a spear throwing device.
Oh, okay, I know what that is. Yeah.
Yeah.
That was like the precursor to the bow and arrow, right?
Hmm.
No? Okay, sorry.
I guess you could say that. Yeah. It's a
Well,
completely different mechanism, but
what came first though? The bow and arrow or the
the atlatl. That's spelled ATL-ATL.
Huh. I didn't know what that was called. Very cool. Okay, so projectiles, and then the second half is about canoeing from calm water to
Whitewater.
not so calm water.
Whitewater. Yeah.
Whitewater.
Yeah. I've never heard anybody actually describe it that way, but
Not so calm water.
hey fellas, this is not so calm water here.
Water is not, it's not very calm. It's rather upset. It's angry. This is angry water. Okay, so you're working on right now a book on squirrels
A
and
novel.
a novel on squirrels. So is it from the squirrels' perspective?
Oh yeah, sure.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. I look forward to that. Okay, guys. Mark, this has been awesome. When you got to come visit us, we have an author wall. Our store had a flood. The author wall survived, so I can let you in there and you can sign it and in our empty store. And then when everything is back to normal and there's less COVID, let's do an in-store event.
Okay.
Oh, we got to please share more of your bow and arrow.
Please share more of your bow and arrow.
Let's talk more about bow and arrow. So why do you really like it?
Let me tell you about the day I decided to shoot, because this was a complete surprise to me. I was up at War Woman Creek by myself in Rabun County. I've been camping there for a few days, and I was walking on the floodplain, and I came to an opening of big white pines. It looked like a colonnade of white pines with an alley going down. And I said out loud, I should be shooting a bow and arrow. And that's how it happened. I had not thought one moment about bow and arrow. Got started that way. As soon as I went home, I found a bow, purchased it, and then I started learning how to make bows and make arrows. And so it just evolved that way. But it's been a very, I don't know the right word for it. Maybe you can use the word spiritual that way, but I love the way that I feel when I'm shooting my bow. I feel like I'm connected to the past.
I was thinking the word connected. Yeah, that's really cool. What kind of bow do you shoot typically?
I shoot a longbow, just because it's romantic.
It's very Robin Hood of you.
Thank you.
Oh my goodness. Okay. If anybody else has questions, I'd love to answer. Well, I'd love to ask Mark to answer them. I won't answer them because I don't know stuff. I just talk. Thank you for doing this. So we have copies of the Wyatt Earp series in stock, and I can get all your other books too. We can get them autographed because Mark lives locally, and yeah, this was fun. Thank you. Yeah, you're pretty darn interesting.
This is the teepee book.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. 2 winters and a teepee.
Yeah.
Oh.
A winter is a year.
Oh.
In
Okay.
old speak.
Oh.
That's the way the Native Americans referred to a year. I would say I'm 73 winters old.
Okay. Huh. So I guess, when George R. Martin said winter is coming, I guess the year is coming. I don't know.
Well, think about when our New Year's is.
Yeah.
So makes sense.
Oh, okay. Susan says, Susan has the best questions. What new books do you have coming out this year?
Well, I have one story about a Cherokee horse trainer who's more or less, I guess you would call a horse whisperer. And he's working in North Carolina, and he is asked by the United States Army at a training facility there to train some special soldiers for horse use in Europe. So it's kind of a top secret thing, and he's asked to help do it. And the story flip flops from this man, whose name is Jonas Walks Through the Storm, to his grandson, who is a teacher in modern day Chicago. And it follows their two lives and how the grandson basically gets lost from his heritage and finds his way back by tracing his grandfather's steps and learning about him. Another book is about a sheriff in Lumpkin County who was a history teacher in the high school, and much to his surprise becomes the sheriff of the county because his best friend, who was the sheriff, is killed. And it's his story of bringing the old West ways to modern police work. And also I have an anthology coming out where I'm one of the authors who provides a short story. It's called Librarians of the West. And it's each story is about a library or librarian. And I've got a novel that I'm very excited about called Indigo Heaven. And it is set in Wyoming in the 1870s. And the reason I'm excited about it is because this is my first 100% fiction offering. Everything in it, originated just from thought. And for example, with the Wyatt Earp books, the story was already there. I just researched it and found ways to put it into words, hopefully that were interesting. But Indigo Heaven will be my baby.
Very cool. Okay, so when are these all coming out?
Let's see. Indigo Heaven comes out, I believe, in August or September, and the anthology comes out in July.
Okay. All right. So we got some stuff to do later this year then. We'll have to do this again.
Yeah, love to.
Yeah. Okay. Oh, we got a question. The novel you are writing from the squirrel's perspective, are there any improvised weapons they used? Chuck a good acorn.
As a matter of fact, boy, I hate giving this away.
It's a teaser. It's not it's not a spoiler.
How about this? What if I told you that two of my squirrels, they're my squirrels now, two of my squirrels have made their way onto a farm where they have found a bucket and a stall in the barn and put it in the seat of the tractor upside down. And you may or may not realize now that we're talking about a bucket seat. But they steal a tractor, these two squirrels. One works the gears down below and the other handles the steering wheel. And they're actually going to use that as a weapon eventually. So for those of you who need to look forward to that violence in the squirrel story with a weapon, Joe, there you go.
So when you said Indigo, was it Indigo Moon?
Indigo Heaven.
Okay, so when you said that book was the only one that is solely from your imagination, I'm going to say the squirrel one is a lot out of your imagination as well.
Sure, it's just not published yet.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. It's either that, or I've had a very, very serious conversation with some squirrels in my backyard.
Yeah. Yeah. Did any of them try to run you off the road?
No. These squirrels, we have mountain squirrels here, much better behaved.
Okay. Anyway, we have Mark's books in stock. Thank you so much for doing this. This was fun. Have a good night. And I put your website in the comments. So if anybody's interested in taking one of Mark's classes, you can do that. And yeah. Do you have any parting words you want to leave the audience with?
Yeah, I hope that everyone out there can get up in the morning, put your feet on the ground with the same kind of excitement that I do as I walk toward my writing desk. I wish that on everybody. That
is really nice. I wish that for myself. Yeah. So, yeah. That's really nice. Okay. Let's say good night. Good night, guys. Thank you.
Good night, Kim.
Bye.